What you just saw is a candle moved by an invisible force, a completely natural force, I assure you. But your life in a similar fashion is moved by a whole host of invisible forces. Your beliefs, your assumptions, your biases, your defense mechanisms. But at the top of that list, I would have to place your motivations. It is what drives you. It is why you go to work in the morning. The story goes that a mayor of a large city was being driven back to work one day after a luncheon speech when the limo pulled up to a traffic light and came to a stop. The mayor glanced out the window and saw two city employees busy at work. One of them dug a hole, the other came right behind him and filled it in. The mayor thought this was quite curious, but before he could say anything, the light changed and the limo pulled away. But as they traveled down the street, the mayor could see on both sides of the boulevard, for the next 2 miles, every 50 feet, there was an identical filled-in hole. Well, by the time he got back to City Hall, the mayor was livid at this obvious waste of taxpayer money. So he dispatched an aide to find out what was going on. An hour later, the aide returned and said, "Mayor, it's nothing to worry about. Turns out usually it's a 3-man crew, but the third guy's on vacation this week, and he's the one that plants the trees." There are few things in life so sad as going through the motions of doing your job without a higher goal in mind. And yet that is what tens of millions of people do every day of their lives around this world. They go to work and go through the motions of their job with no purpose any higher than earning a paycheck, paying the bills, and growing older. That is a tragedy in any field, but when you are in education, regardless of your job description in the field of education, it is doubly tragic. You must never allow yourself to forget why you go to work in the morning. It is not to earn a paycheck. It is to be a part of a very noble enterprise of transforming the lives of students. The great leaders of this world differ from average ones, primarily not in their personality, not in their IQ, not in their looks, not in their talent, but in the intensity of their motivation. Now, all of you are motivated by different things. Some by money, some by philanthropy, some by relationships, some by fear. But irrespective of what your particular motives might be today, the fact remains that a key difference between being average and being superior is the level at which a person is motivated to perform. All highly influential leaders are obsessed with what I call a magical dream, and it is each leader's ability to infect the people around them with that dream that determines in large measure how effective that leader might become. For Alexander the Great, it was to conquer the world. For the Founding Fathers, it was to create a free society. For Abraham Lincoln, it was to end slavery and preserve the Union. No one has said it better in the modern era than Martin Luther King Jr., who 40 years ago stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and declared, "I have a dream, that this nation under God shall rise up and live out the true meaning of her creed, that all men are created equal." And decent people of all races, not just African Americans, followed because they were swept up in the magic of his dream. They lived off the overflow of his passion. They took his goose pimples and put them on their own bodies until they could internalize and articulate and own the dream for themselves. Now, I've got good news for you. Your dream doesn't have to be quite that magical, because you don't need 60 million people to follow you to make it true. You just need the people that surround you, either in your district, in your school, or in your department, to buy into your dream to make it come true. Now, it's a good thing that these last many years I've spent every August on the road doing opening convocations for school districts around the country, because August has not been a pleasant time around my home the last 6 or 7 years. And I'll tell you why. It's because my wife is a nervous wreck, and her nerves are wrecked starting around the beginning of June, and it goes into a crescendo until one particular Thursday on August. It's circled in red on her calendar. As it approaches, she becomes more and more anxious, because it is on that Thursday these last 7 years that my wife and I have to go up to the school, the elementary school, where they will have posted my son's teacher assignment for the upcoming school year. He's in middle school now, so it doesn't happen anymore, but I tell you, it's been rough. And because all summer long, we have been hoping against hope that our little boy will be assigned to one particular teacher in that upcoming grade. You know why? It is because that lady's reputation has preceded her. She has a reputation for doing it with every student. She takes every kid and she manages to brush away all of the ashes, find a few glowing embers, and blow softly on them until they erupt in an inferno of a desire for knowledge and learning. And yet, just to be candid and fair, which I can be because I'm leaving in a couple of hours, All summer long, we have been praying that he will not be assigned to one or two particular teachers in that upcoming grade. Even the atheists in our neighborhood go to church all summer long just to hedge their bets. Because there's something about that lady's reputation that has preceded her too. Because somehow every year she manages to do it. She takes every kid, she spreads out the ashes, finds a few glowing embers, and pours water all over them. Now, what is the difference between those two teachers? The one that you want your kid or grandkid being taught by, or the one that you don't want your student anywhere near? Well, I'm sure there are a lot of differences, but at the core, I believe it is this. It is why that teacher goes to work in the morning. The teacher you want your kid being taught by, let me tell you why he or she goes to work in the morning. They love kids, and they believe at the core of their soul, with every fiber of their being, that what they are doing is making a lasting, positive impact on that student. That teacher you don't want your kid anywhere near, let me tell you why he or she goes to work in the morning. They need health insurance or a pension plan, or they've got 3 years till retirement and they are hanging on for dear life. And they don't care how many kids they wipe out in the process. Folks, what is true in the classroom is also true in any department of education. Let me ask you, why do you go to work in the morning? It dare not be for a paycheck. This is not a job. It is way too important to be a job. This cannot even be a career for you. It's too important even for that. This has to be a calling. You have to go to work each and every day with a passion to change the lives of students. Now, some of you are going to say, you don't get it, Mr. Fancy Pants motivational speaker. I just oversee the bus drivers. That doesn't matter. Regardless of your job description or title, or the words they put on your business card or your door, you have to go to work because you are passionate about the dream of transforming the lives of kids. And as a leader, it is your job to make sure that the people that report to you always have their eyes above the fray of the day-to-day mundane activities of their job. You have to constantly lift their gaze above their job description to see at a higher level what it is that they are accomplishing in life. That's your job. You have to be an inspirational leader for your people. What guys like me do at a conference for you once or twice a year, you have to be doing on a regular basis with your people, and that is reminding them of why they go to work in the morning. Let me ask you a question. Is there a fire burning in your belly to transform the lives of students? And does it burn so brightly that it keeps you awake nights? And when you finally fall asleep, do you find yourself dreaming about it? And when you wake up in the morning, is it one of the first thoughts on your mind? And in your free time during the day, do you find yourself scheming and dreaming about ways to do it better? If you don't have that type of a passion and you can't get it, you will never be the type of leader you could otherwise be, because you cannot give the people around you a disease that you don't already have. Now, folks, a little caveat, it has to be a noble dream. Your dream can't be about you. You see, just because you have a dream doesn't mean the people around you are going to buy into it. In fact, if your dream is a selfish one, not only will they not buy into it, they might even try to sabotage it if they think they can get away with it. Your dream has to be about the students. Hey, raise your hand if your boss is in the room. Okay, let's see. You, ma'am, right there in the burgundy top. What is your first name? Laura. Who is your boss? Is the superintendent in the room? Oh, right here. I'm sorry, your name? Dr. Cook. Okay, and you're Laura. Okay, and what do you do, Laura? Okay, let's suppose that Dr. Cook called you into her office. And let's suppose she just said, Laura, I just want you to know you're a fine employee, and I've got big things in mind for you in the future. And let's suppose she just began to talk excitedly about education. And what district are you in? Washington. Is there a Washington in Florida? Washington County. Okay, got it. Okay. Now, maybe you skipped that day in geography. I don't know. Let's suppose that she began to talk excitedly about all of the things going on in Washington County education. And then let's say, just for the sake of the illustration, that she took out a map of all of Florida and began to talk excitedly about educational opportunities across Florida. And then, just for the sake of the illustration, let's suppose she pulled a map out of her desk of the entire United States, laid it out on her desk, and began to talk frenetically about educational opportunities across the nation. And then, just for the sake of the illustration, she reached under her desk and pulled out a globe. And she began to foam at the mouth as she talked wild-eyed about educational opportunities around the world, putting pins all over the globe in educational centers. And then began to say, Laura, I just want you to know you're a fine employee, and if you work hard, if you dedicate yourself, if you come in early every single day, if you work through your lunch break, if you skip all of your breaks, if you work late into the evening, if you go to every extracurricular activity, if you work through your summers, if you skip everything that you want to do in life, if you sacrifice your family on the altar of Washington County Public Schools, one day everything we've talked about will be mine. How motivational would that be to you? You can answer truthfully. Not very. You see, Dr. Cook's dream has to go way beyond amassing praises, raises, accolades, and promotions for herself. Her dream has got to be about the kids. And if her dream is about transforming the lives of kids, that's something Laura can buy into. That's something that she can catch. She can catch fire with that. Do you have that type of a passion? Don't ever allow yourself to forget why you go to work in the morning. There was once a monk who was overseeing a church building project, and he went out to the construction site to see how progress was coming along. While there, he saw 4 men chipping stones. He asked the first, my son, what are you doing? The man scowled. He said, Father, I'm chipping stones. He turned to the second. He said, my son, what are you doing? The man matter-of-factly said, Father, I'm building a wall. He walked over to the third. He said, my son, what are you doing? The man smiled. He said, Father, I'm erecting a cathedral. He approached the fourth. He said, my son, what are you doing? The man's face lit up. He said, Father, I'm advancing the kingdom of God on earth, one stone at a time. I believe that it is your solemn duty as an employee of the school system that you ruthlessly discipline yourself each and every day to give that fourth type of an answer. I wonder if 6 months from now I was to walk up to one of you superintendents and ask you what you're doing, how would you respond? Oh, making out one more budget request to make the board laugh themselves silly. Or would you say, I'm making sure that the kids of my district one day go to college instead of jail? I'm making sure that they one day live in houses instead of under bridges, that they drive real cars instead of death traps. I'm transforming the world one budget request at a time. You must never allow yourself to forget why you go to school in the morning or why you go to your office in the morning. It's to transform the lives of kids. Several years ago, I was invited to be the opening convocation speaker on the campus of Orange County Community College in Los Angeles, California. And after the presentation, I was on stage packing up my props to go back to the airport when an elderly woman came up on stage and introduced herself. We'll call her Mrs. Smith. She said, would you mind if I told you about my most rewarding experience as an educator? I said I would be delighted to hear. She said, for more than 30 years, I taught math at the high school level in the public schools of Los Angeles. But she said a few years ago, I retired from that job and became a part-time professor here at the college. She said way back in about 1970, give or take a couple of years, there was a boy in my math class named David. He had long hair in a time when that was considered a sign of rebellion. He wore an earring in a time when that was completely unheard of among males. He always sat in the back of the room. He didn't participate, and he was not doing well in school. She said, one day I got a telephone call from David's dad. And he said, Mrs. Smith, can you please do something for our boy David? He's got a good heart and a good mind, but unless somebody intervenes, that kid is never going to graduate from college. He won't listen to me or his mom. He hates us. Can you please help our boy David? She said, I'll see what I can do. So she said one day she pulled David aside and she said, David, do you prefer to work with your hands or people more? He said, with my hands. She said, if you'd like to make a little extra money, I've got a garden in my backyard. If you'll come over to my house 1 or 2 afternoons a week, I'll pay you to work in my garden. And so she said for the next couple of years, David would come over to her house once or twice a week and work in her garden. And as he did so, she would follow him around in a lawn chair and just listen to the boy rant about how much he hated life and how much he hated school and how much he hated his parents, especially his dad. And she said, to make a long story short, eventually David cobbled together enough credits to graduate from high school. And I'll never forget how at the graduation ceremony, David's dad came up and gave me a bear hug and said, Mrs. Smith, thank you from the bottom of my heart. If it weren't for you, David never would have gotten his diploma. Well, she said, for more than 30 years, I treasured that moment in my heart as one of those little perks that we educators get way too seldom in this life. And she said, but now let me tell you the epilogue. She said, not long ago, I got another call from David's dad, now an elderly man. And he said, Mrs. Smith, you may not remember us, but we've certainly never forgotten you. Our son David is the boy that you helped get through high school 30-some years ago. He turns 50 next week, and he's specifically asked us to invite you to his birthday party. And she said, well, she was completely taken aback and flabbergasted. She said, why, of course I remember David. I would be delighted to come to his birthday party, whatever became of David. And he said, you don't know? He works at USC Hospital as the chief of surgery. Now here on the one hand, we have a boy that never would have gotten out of high school, but because one person in the educational system decided to intervene, is now the chief of surgery at one of the biggest hospitals in one of the biggest cities on earth. And then Mrs. Smith said, you know what really gets me? I said, what? She said, if I'd never gotten that second phone call, I would have gone to my grave never having any idea the difference I'd made in David's life. Listen carefully. Because of your job description, most of you will never even get the first phone call, let alone the second. But you must never allow yourself to believe for a moment that there are not hundreds of Davids out there, and many more to be made because you do your job. That's why you go to work in the morning. It's not for a paycheck. When it dawns on you the privilege that you have to earn a living improving the lives of kids, you will wake up in the morning with tingles running up and down your spine in wonder and amazement that they will actually pay you to do something that is so wonderful, so worthy, and so noble.